Back in June, Bethesda announced Elder Scrolls 6, so in this video I wanted to discuss some of my personal opinions on what I would like to see changed for the next installment of this series. Now, I got the idea for this video when I was planning a different video. I was going to do a video over the problems with conjuration in Skyrim, but I decided to take the topic more broad and just discuss some of the overall problems I have with Skyrim. Great game, but it certainly has its flaws. And I figured if I needed to, I could go and do separate, more in-depth videos over some of these topics later on. Anyway, the first topic I want to talk about is probably the biggest problem overall in Skyrim, and that is with the perk system. The first problem I have is that there are too many absolutely useless perks within the perk system, and sometimes even perk trees, such as the lockpicking tree. There's just not really any purpose for it. Sure, there are some useful perks within a lockpicking skill tree, such as Golden Touch, which allows you to find more gold within chests. But if you're picking locks, you probably are a thief, and you already have abundant amounts of gold, so this little extra gold isn't going to make any massive difference, and certainly isn't worth the wasted skill points that you would have to invest in the skill tree. But there are also just individual useless perks, such as the Keymaster perk from the pickpocketing skill tree, which allows you to pickpocket keys more easily. Now, the reason this is a useless perk is because, as just mentioned, lockpicking is already quite easy, so needing a key is somewhat unnecessary. Also, if you did invest in the lockpicking skill tree, you can get the Wax Key perk, which is, again, another useless perk. But that would sort of make this perk unnecessary. Even with a relatively low pickpocketing level, you have an 80 to 90% chance of successfully pickpocketing a key, so this perk really doesn't do anything. Another problem I have with the skill tree system is that there are too many unbalanced perks. Now, most of them are unbalanced in the sense that they don't give you a good enough positive effect for the level at which you have to be to acquire them. A great example of this is Purity from the Alchemy skill tree, which takes away all positive effects from poisons and all negative effects from potions. While that is definitely a useful perk, you're required to have an alchemy level of 100. Now, this is really a basic necessity of alchemy. You don't want to apply a poison to your bow and shoot an enemy and it does 15 damage, but it restores some of their stamina. And you don't want to take a potion that restores health, but damages your own magicka. So this is something that is obviously, again, useful, but it's ridiculous that you have to wait so long to get it. The Experimenter perk, also from the Alchemy skill tree, is another one of these examples. The Experimenter perk has 3 different levels, and it allows you to learn different effects of certain ingredients by eating them. While this could be handy at a lower level, while you're trying to figure out which ingredients do what, it first becomes available at far too high of a level, being level 50. Usually by the time you're at level 50 in alchemy, you know the majority of the effects of your ingredients. You might have some missing here and there, but not that many. And it gets even more so. For the second tier you have to be at level 70, and the third tier you have to be at level 90. And let's be honest, by the time your alchemy skill is at level 90, you know pretty much all of the effects of each ingredient. And even then, you can just go online and find it. So it makes this perk really unnecessary. Could be useful, but at a much lower level. I'd say start the perk at level 20, and then every 5 or 10 levels allow the next tier. But at levels 50, 70, 90, it's just far too high of a level to make it of any practical use. Another perk would be the Poison perk from the Pickpocket skill tree. Now, this perk is fun, and I've talked about it quite a bit in my Alchemy and Pickpocket playthrough of Skyrim. However, it's no more than a fun perk, as it allows you to pickpocket enemies and place poisons in their inventory to slowly harm them. Now, again, this sounds fun. It can be just something to mess around with, but it's not really useful. I mean, it makes a lot more sense to actually apply the poison to a weapon and then hit them with that weapon. So it's not any more useful for dealing damage, and it's certainly not any more stealthy, because you actually have to sneak up on your opponent, successfully place it in their pocket, and then get away before they start taking damage. It'd be much more convenient and deadly to place the poison on a bow and then shoot them. So I'm not saying this perk should be completely removed in Elder Scrolls 6. I think it should just be lowered to a different level, perhaps level 20. Simply because it is a fun perk, but it's not a game-changing perk, and it's certainly not a perk you can base an entire playstyle around. Another perk that I think to be extremely useful, but just too difficult to get to, is the Twin Souls perk in the Conjuration skill tree. This requires a level 100, but it allows you to summon 2 Atronachs or have 2 Raised Dead, or 1 of each, at the same time. Now, again, I think this is an extremely useful perk. However, Conjuration's already an unbalanced tree as a whole. I think it's extremely underpowered, which I'll talk more about here in a moment. So when you add this perk that would really, really help the skill tree, but you make it have a level 100 requirement, I think that's too far up there. I think it should be closer around a level 50 or 60 range, so that you have to put some effort into the skill tree to get it, but you're not forced to use a skill tree that is just, let's face it, inadequate before you get to the level 100 where you get this perk and now it becomes tolerable. Another change I'd like to see to the skill tree system in Elder Scrolls 6 would be a better overall balancing of all the trees. That means getting rid of some of these overpowered trees. And I don't mean getting rid of them in the sense of just doing away with them, as much as I mean bringing up other skill trees to match your level. And enchanting is a perfect example of this. It is such an overpowered skill tree within Skyrim. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, no, enchanting is great, I love it. And that's the problem with it, is that it is too good. You can invest into enchanting and suddenly you're great at anything. Think about it. Let's say you've been a warrior who uses great swords and heavy armor the entire game, but you've been investing in enchanting. Well, now you've maxed out your enchanting and you're like, you know what, I want to be a thief. So you put on some light armor, you grab a bow, and you throw some enchantments on there, and suddenly you're at least an adequate thief, if not a great thief. And you've invested no time into these thieving skills, you simply are good at it because you've enchanted your gear to be good at it. And don't get me wrong, I think enchanting needs to make a difference. It would be underpowered if you threw an enchantment onto your boots. It made sneak better and it really made no difference. So it needs to make a difference, and I do understand that. But I think it needs to be a little less overpowered overall. Don't make it so that you can put an enchantment on something and then be equally as good as somebody who has no enchantments but has invested a lot of time into the tree. I think it should be assisting those skill trees and not making up for them. The other problem with enchanting is that it actually becomes almost necessary to have it. And in this way it becomes overpowered as well, because if I'm playing a role-playing game, I want to be able to play how I want to play. I want to be able to play through it as a thief or as a rogue or as a mage. But no matter which role you play, you're at quite a disadvantage if you don't use enchanting, because it makes that big of a difference. And so I'd like to be able to play through the game and neglect enchanting entirely and not feel like I'm losing some major aspect of the game. Now, of course you're going to lose out some because you're forced to use enchantments on pieces of gear that you can find or buy because you can't enchant them yourself. However, the perk points saved from not investing into the enchanting skill tree could be used elsewhere to make up for it, and that would be a good balance. But as it is, if you neglect the enchanting skill tree, you're at a massive disadvantage. I would also really like to see the bringing up of some underpowered skill trees such as Conjuration. And I talked about this earlier and I said I would discuss it further, and here we are. The reason I find Conjuration to be massively underpowered is because it doesn't know what it wants to be as a skill tree. Most of these skill trees really act in one of two ways. Either they are a basis / main skill tree that can stand alone, or they're an assisting skill tree. Alchemy, for example, is an assisting skill tree. If you invest all your points into alchemy, you're not going to be able to complete the game. You can't take potions and use all kinds of poisons and make yourself invincible the way maybe investing in heavy armor and two-handed weapons would make you. The same goes for illusion and alteration. They're assisting skill trees. But if you take a look at the destruction tree, archery tree, one-handed or two-handed trees, those are standalone base game skill trees. You can invest the majority of your skill points into those trees, or all of your skill points into those trees, and you're going to be able to make it somewhere. Because if you can kill the enemies faster than they can kill you, you can do something. So the problem that you get with Conjuration is that it's partially an assisting skill tree and partially a standalone skill tree. So it really performs inadequately at both. Because you can't just raise some creatures or summon some Atronachs and stand back and let them fight for you and expect to win. That's not going to happen. At best, they assist you while you're fighting. But they take so much point investment and so much magicka that they don't really work. They're too expensive. And you would expect them to be able to help you out quite a bit. But those Atronachs in Raised Dead simply don't. On the other hand, it comes across as an assisting skill tree because of things like bound weapons and soul trap. Soul trap isn't going to get you anywhere within the game. It only assists you for your enchanting because it gives you the ability to fill soul gems to use for enchanting. Bound weapons are also assisting spells. They don't stand alone. So if you're using a bound sword, you're assisting your one-handed skill tree, because if you have no skill or no levels or point investment into one-handed, but you're using the bound sword heavily, it's not going to do very well, simply because you don't have the points invested into the right skill tree. So I really think the best way to fix Conjuration in Elder Scrolls 6 would be to make your Conjuration a standalone system. Make your Atronachs better. Make your Raise Dead better. Maybe allow you to raise more dead and have more Atronachs. Make it so that when you're using the Conjuration skill tree, you feel like a true necromancer. You feel like you can raise armies of dead to fight for you, and that you can summon Atronachs and Daedra from Oblivion to fight for you. And maybe even give some interactive spells to the tree. Make it so that you have spells that allow you to heal your Atronachs, or allow you to give some of your health to some of your undead, or take health from your undead and give it to you, or sacrifice one of your Atronachs that you summon in return for half the magic back, or stamina or health, or something like that. Allow you to interact with your summoned creatures and have more of them and make them better. And I think that would really fix the Conjuration skill tree, because every time I play a mage in Skyrim, I always attempt to go for Conjuration, and I want to go for the Necromancy, and I can't. I'm forced to do a little bit of Necromancy and Destruction. So to keep with the theme, I do the Conjuration, then I do Frost magic, usually, just to kind of help keep with the cold, dark, grave theme thing. But I really think Elder Scrolls 6 could benefit massively from an improved Conjuration system and get it more on the Necromancy side and the standalone skill tree. Alchemy is another one of those skill trees that is just too underpowered. Now, I mentioned earlier that it was an assisting skill tree, and it is. However, I think it is too difficult to level up. As I mentioned, Enchanting being an overpowered skill tree, I do think they did something right, and that was that everything you do involving Enchanting levels you up. So deconstructing items, recharging items, and enchanting items all give you experience towards your enchanting level. However, very little of what you do with alchemy actually affects your alchemy level. Picking ingredients doesn't improve your alchemy. Eating ingredients doesn't improve your alchemy. Taking potions doesn't improve your alchemy. Only actually crafting the potions and poisons improves your alchemy. So there's just too little content in the game that actually levels up your alchemy system. Now, if you've watched my Alchemy and Pickpocket playthrough of Skyrim, you'll have heard me mention this a million times. I think one of the big things they could do to help with this is add cooking. And I'm not saying add cooking as a whole separate skill. Add it to your alchemy tree. Make it so that when you cook stuff, it levels up your alchemy. And I think it's a bit ridiculous that it doesn't, since it works a lot in the same way. You drink potions to buff yourself. You eat food to buff yourself. So now you really, aside from the food that gives you the buff, there's no reward for cooking anything. And personally, I don't think the buffs are worth the time spent gathering your ingredients for cooking or cooking it. I think there needs to be some perks involved with that. So I think you could incorporate the cooking skill with the alchemy skill, and that would give you a whole lot more content to be able to level up your alchemy skill. So make things like gathering ingredients and testing ingredients and using the potions and poisons, make that level up your skill too. And I think that would make a massive difference and be a huge step to making the alchemy tree much more viable and kind of hold its own place within the game. Another small thing I want to mention about the skill tree system within Skyrim that I would like to see improved upon in Elder Scrolls 6 is I would like to have some more creative perks. Too many of the perks within Skyrim are does more damage or costs less magicka. While those are okay to have, I don't think they should make up the majority of your perks. I think they should just be a perk here or there for that, but I think you should have some more creative perks within the game, because I think improving damage and decreasing magicka cost should come inherently with leveling up. I don't think you should have to invest perk points to get these special perks to be able to do this. Again, I think it should come inherently with leveling up. Not so much the increased damage or decreased magicka just because you leveled up, but perhaps, if you just by leveling your one-handed tree, your two-handed tree, or archery, or whatever sort of combat tree you're using, by leveling up that skill you should innately do more damage, which you do in Skyrim, but I don't think it's enough. If it was enough, there wouldn't be the need for the perks that add additional damage. And I think the same should go for Magicka. Any sort of magic skill tree you level up should just automatically increase the damage you're doing with those spells and decrease their cost. You shouldn't have to invest these perk points to get that, because perks really need to kind of break an established rule within the game. And doing more damage and costing less magic, it doesn't really do that. And honestly, it's just uncreative and almost comes across as lazy. And it makes each skill tree kind of boring. You go from one skill tree to another, particularly within the magic skill trees, and you don't get anything different. You're in the destruction skill tree and you see cast novice spells for half magicka. Then you go to the alteration skill tree and you see cast novice alteration spells with half magicka. And you go to conjuration and you get the same thing, and then illusion and you get the same thing. And you also get that with your other combat related trees. You go and see that bows do 20% more damage, one-handed weapons do 20% more damage, two-handed weapons do 20% more damage, and it's so cookie cutter. It's just copy paste, and I would like to see something more creative overall, but even more so within the trees themselves, because really the only difference you get down to between your one-handed and two-handed trees are the weapons and the way you play with them. The perks are variations of the same thing. So I'd like to see some more creativity with that. Now, of course, there are other smaller changes I think they could make within Elder Scrolls 6 to improve it massively, such as better menu systems. Now, when Skyrim came out, the menu was fine. It worked, and it was understandable for the time. However, I think it needs a big update because, let's face it, nobody wants lists and lists and lists. Now, when you have as much content as games like Skyrim or even Fallout have, you're going to have lists. There's really no way of avoiding it. But I think you can manage it better, especially with like the PlayStation 4. Since it's got the touchpad in the center, you could have a system where you press on the center pad and it brings up a wheel, and then you just move around, so you get like 10 or 15 quick select items. And so I think we could mitigate the amount of lists and reading you're doing within the game simply by having better menu systems. I'd also like to see some improved horses. Holy crap, I'd like to see some improved horses. Even when Skyrim came out, I suppose it's understandable for the horse mechanics, but I feel like they're so clunky. Both in the sense of riding, they're just not particularly agile. And since Skyrim is mostly mountains, they don't go over mountains very well, so you're kind of forced to abandon them either way. And the horse combat is awful. Now, I understand the horse combat can be difficult to do. Some games have done it in different ways, some better than others. But I think it can be done better in Skyrim. Because of the lack of mobility on a horse, which is sort of ridiculous because that's one of the advantages of fighting from horseback is mobility, but Skyrim just doesn't give that to you. Partially because your horses have such wide turns, the controls are kind of clunky for horses, and given the fact that it is so mountainous, there's a lot of roads and stuff where you really don't get a lot of room to run around. Because you might fall off a cliff, you might fall into a river, you might just have a mountain or a building on either side of you, and it makes it difficult to maneuver. So you're really just forced to line up one of your sides with your enemy and sit there and tank the hits while you sit there and do these over-exaggerated swings at your opponent. And I think I'd like something that gives you a little bit more mobility, since that is one of the advantages of fighting on horseback. And I think the horses also need to be a bit faster. 1,000 gold's not a lot towards the end of the game in Skyrim, but starting out it can be a decent amount. And so you invest this $1,000 in a horse, and you find out that it's really not that much faster than you, and it has no purpose other than moving around. But since you have the carriage you can hire to the holds, and the hold capitals, you have the fast travel system, and the fact that you run almost as fast as the horses do, not quite, but almost, makes having a horse not really worth it, especially since any time you do save, because the horse is slightly faster, is lost due to clunky controls, and you're getting stuck on things that you wouldn't if you're on foot. So I think horse controls, and both for combat and just overall controls for them, and even then their relevance and their usefulness is really underwhelming within the game, and I think that's something I'd really like to see improved within Elder Scrolls 6. Bettering the skill trees would definitely be the biggest focus. If it were my call, I would say definitely make those perks more creative, balance them better, and get rid of those useless perks that have no place within the game. As always, thanks for watching.